Spilling coffee on a man's shoes in this city usually meant nothing. Spilling it on Callum Varga's shoes meant they'd never find your body. Except nobody told Fiona Mercer that. She'd been at the Ritz-Carlton on René Levesque for exactly 47 minutes when the disaster happened. 47 minutes of white-knuckling a silver tray, of navigating marble floors in the sensible flats she'd bought from a winner's clearance bin, of trying not to bump into the immaculately dressed servers who moved through the grand ballroom like they'd been born in it. She was a last-minute replacement. The agency had called her at 6 in the morning, desperate, offering double her usual rate to fill a shift at some private corporate function. Fiona hadn't asked questions. Her hydro bill was 2 months overdue, and her landlord had started leaving passive-aggressive notes under her door. She was 26 years old, 5'4", and 270 pounds of raw anxiety wrapped in a borrowed uniform blouse that pulled uncomfortably across her shoulders. Her dark hair kept escaping the bobby pins she'd wrestled it into. She had a first-class honors degree in accounting from Concordia that she owed $38,000 for, and she currently poured drinks for a living. It was the rug that got her. An absurd, ornate thing. Turkish, probably worth more than her car. Her left heel caught the edge of it, and the rest was physics. The tray tipped, the coffee pot launched. Stream of dark, scalding liquid arsed through the air with the grace and precision of something in a nightmare, and landed squarely on the left leg of a man who had been quietly watching the room from the perimeter. He didn't flinch. That was the first thing she noticed. He was tall, considerably taller than the men around him, with dark hair silvered at the temples and the kind of face that looked like it had decided, somewhere around 40, to stop caring what anyone thought. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of her rent. 2 large, quiet men flanked him at a respectful distance. The fabric of his trouser leg was soaked through. He looked down at it slowly, then up at her. "Sweet mother of," Fiona caught herself, clapping a hand over her mouth. "I am so sorry. I am so. I'll get a cloth. I'll fix it." "I can't fix it, it's all ready. I'm going to get napkins." She was already spinning on her heel, grabbing a stack of linen cocktail napkins from a passing tray with the frantic energy of someone who understood viscerally that they had just made an enormous mistake. She came back and crouched down without thinking, pinned the napkins to the ruined trouser, leg blotting with the desperate efficiency of a woman who'd cleaned enough spills to know none of this was going to help. "Enough," the man said. His voice was low and even, not angry. That was the second thing she noticed. Just measured. Fiona looked up from her crouch and realized suddenly how this looked. She was on the floor. He was looking at her from what felt like a very great height. One of the large quiet men beside him had his hand moving slightly toward the inside of his jacket. She straightened up slowly, napkins still clutched in her fist, heart hammering. "I'm going to be fired," she said, because it was the only honest thing she could think of. "Probably," Callum Varga said. There was something at the edge of his mouth, not quite a smile. Something that had been a smile once before whatever had happened to it. "What's your name?" "Fiona Mercer." She said it like she was giving a deposition. "I'm agency staff. It was the rug. I'd like the record to show it was the rug." He looked at her for a long moment. Not the way men usually looked at her, which was either straight through her or with the particular practiced indifference people used to avoid acknowledging that a fat woman was standing in front of them. He looked at her like she was a thing he hadn't expected to find and wasn't quite sure what to do with. "Go back to work, Fiona Mercer," he said. She went. She didn't get fired that night, which made no sense, because she'd seen the hotel manager watching from across the room with the expression of a man rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. But when her shift ended and she collected her jacket from the coat check, the manager caught her arm and told her the client had specifically requested she not face any professional consequences. Fiona walked home in the October cold and told herself it was a strange coincidence and promptly forgot about it. The envelope arrived at the agency 3 days later. It was addressed to her which was itself unusual. The agency communicated everything through their client portal. Inside was a single card, cream-colored, embossed with a small crest she didn't recognize. The handwriting was precise and European-looking. "I'm looking for an office administrator. Permanent position. Competitive salary. If you're interested, this card at 1240 Drummond, 14th floor. CV." The agency manager had looked at the card like it was a live grenade and told Fiona, very carefully, that Callum Varga was the kind of client they did not ask questions about, and that whatever she decided, the agency would respect. Her hydro bill was now 3 months overdue. She presented the card at 1240 Drummond on a Thursday morning. The offices of Varga Acquisitions occupied the entire 14th floor of a building that looked conservative and forgettable from the street, and like money made physical from the inside. Pale wood, clean lines, the kind of plants that somehow stayed alive without visible sunlight. The receptionist looked at Fiona's borrowed blazer and cheap flats without expression and picked up a phone. The man who came to collect her was built like a side-by-side refrigerator and introduced himself only as Henrik. "He's in the East office," Henrik said. "Do not sit down until he invites you to. Do not ask about the artwork. Do not touch anything on the desk." Fiona stared at him. "I wasn't going to." Okay, sure." Callum Varga's East office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountain and a desk the size of her entire apartment kitchen. And he was standing at the window with his back to her when she came in, a phone to his ear, speaking in something that sounded like Hungarian. He finished the call, turned around, studied her with the same unsettling directness he'd had in the hotel ballroom. "You have an accounting degree," he said. "Not a question." "From Concordia," Fiona said. "Class of 2022. Not. I've been doing event work too." "I know what you've been doing." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. "Chris, I need someone who can manage the administrative side of this office without requiring supervision. Someone capable of handling sensitive financial records without asking unnecessary questions. Your predecessor required too much explaining." Fiona looked around the office. Through the glass wall to her left, she could see 2 men in the outer area who were built identically to Henrik, which was to say, like people who had decided bones were optional. Nyon. Desk in front of Callum Varga was a ledger, actual paper, handwritten, that he turned face down before she could read anything. She was not a stupid woman. "How sensitive?" she asked. He met her eyes. There was a long pause that she had the impression was a kind of test. "Sensitive enough that I need someone discreet," he said. "The salary is $110,000 a year. Benefits. Parking. You'll work directly with me and no one else." Fiona thought about $38,000 in student debt and a landlord who had now taped a formal notice to her door. "When do I start?" she said, guilty. The first week was an education in staying very calm. She was smart enough to understand within 48 hours that Varga Acquisitions was not primarily in the business of acquiring things, at least not through any mechanism that would appear in a standard business textbook. Near the men who came and went from the office. Always Henrik's type, always speaking in fragments, always leaving before noon, did not look like they were discussing real estate portfolios. The calls Callum took in the East office with the door closed lasted too long and ended too abruptly. The ledger she was never allowed to touch. She filed what she was given to file. She answered the phone with a professionalism that made Henrik visibly relax, reorganized the administrative drive, which had the chaotic energy of something managed by someone who believed alphabetical order was optional. She ordered the right coffee, a flat white from the place on Bishop, and not the one on Crescent. Henrik explained this with extreme seriousness on day 1, and she had it on the desks before Callum arrived each morning. She did not ask questions. What she did do on the Thursday of her second week was find an error. She hadn't been looking for it. It was reconciling the operational expense accounts, legitimate ones, the ones she was cleared for, when the numbers simply didn't match. Someone had been padding the courier expenses, small amounts, consistent intervals. the kind of quiet, sustained skimming that assumed nobody was paying close attention. 11 months of it, roughly $19,000. She sat with this information for approximately 6 minutes. Before she knocked on the East office door, Callum was on a call, looked up, registered her expression, and ended the call without explanation. "The operational accounts," Fiona said, setting her printed summary on the edge of his desk, carefully, not touching anything else. "One's been skimming courier costs. 11 months, just under 19,000. I've flagged every instance." He picked up the summary. His face didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Who has access to these accounts?" he asked quietly. "Based on the system logs. People. I'm one of them, and I started 2 weeks ago, so." She folded her hands. "The other 2 are both in your outer office." The silence in the room was very thorough. "Thank you, Fiona," Callum said. His voice had gone somewhere flat and still. "Close the door on your way out." She did. One of the men from the outer office didn't come in the following Monday. Nobody mentioned it. Fiona reconciled the courier accounts, which were suddenly and completely clean, and did not ask. He started leaving coffee on her desk. Not just any coffee. The flat white from Bishop, the one Henrik had explained, was the right one. She'd never mentioned she'd been buying her own from the Dunkin' 2 blocks over, because the Bishop place was $8, and she was still calibrating the budget against her first full paycheck. But Callum had apparently noticed something she hadn't broadcast. The cup would be there when she arrived, still warm, with her name spelled correctly in a handwriting she eventually identified as his. She was a sensible woman. She had a practical nature and a very good memory for situations that ended badly. She catalogued the coffee as a professional courtesy and kept her face neutral. She was slightly less successful at keeping her face neutral when, in her 4th week, she walked into the middle of something she absolutely should not have walked into. The East office door was supposed to be closed. It wasn't. She had a folder of documents that needed signatures, and she came around the corner and stopped because there were 4 men in the office she'd never seen before. Expensive suits, of aggressive posture, and Henrik was standing by the wall like a person actively trying to become structural. And Callum was behind his desk with his hands flat on the surface, and an expression she could only describe as the absolute last warning before something irreversible happened. Nobody noticed her for a moment. Then Callum looked up and saw her in the doorway, and something complicated moved across his face. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, without looking away from the men across his desk. His voice was perfectly even. "I need those transfer documents filed under the Beaupre account. Can you take care of that?" There were no transfer documents. The Beaupre account didn't exist. "Of course," Fiona said in her best professional voice, the one she'd developed waiting tables when difficult customers needed redirecting. "I'll get right on that." She went back to her desk, sat down, and started typing something very deliberately so she would look occupied. Her hands were almost steady. Through the glass, she watched the 4 men leave 15 minutes later, watched the way they left, quickly, without looking back. When Callum came out of the East office, he stopped at her desk. "Go have Henrik drive you," he said. "I have my transit pass," Fiona said. He looked at her. "I know, Henrik will drive you." She didn't argue. The following morning, she found a small plant on her desk, a pothos in a white ceramic pot. No note. Looked at it for a moment, and then watered it, and sent Henrik an email asking whether there was a standard operating budget for office plants, because she intended to keep it alive. Henrik forwarded the email to Callum. Callum replied directly, "There is now." It was her 7th week when things stopped being manageable. Callum had been in tense meetings all week. A territorial dispute, she'd gathered, from the fragments she wasn't supposed to hear, involving a man named Tarrant who had apparently miscalculated how far Callum's patience extended. The office had that particular quality of pressurized quiet that preceded something she didn't want to think too carefully about. On the Wednesday she left at her usual time, stopped at the dépanneur on Saint-Mathieu for milk and those particular chips she only bought when she was stressed, and took the short way home through the residential block. She was thinking about the reconciliation she'd left unfinished, which was why she didn't register the black SUV until it had slowed beside her. She registered the window coming down, registered the man leaning out of it, late 30s, a scar bisecting his eyebrow, a particular kind of smile. "Mercer," the man said. "You work for Varga." It wasn't a question. Fiona kept walking. "I'd stop," the man said pleasantly. "I've got 2 men behind you." She stopped. His name was Tarrant, he explained, and he needed Callum Varga to understand something, and she was going to help him communicate it. He was pushed into the back of the SUV with a rough efficiency that she'd later describe to herself as impersonal. Her phone was taken. She was zip-tied, plastic, the cheap kind, and left in what turned out to be a storage unit somewhere in Ville-Émard, with a single bare bulb overhead and concrete walls that smelled like old motor oil. There were 2 men watching her. One of them was playing something on a phone with the volume up. The other kept pacing. Fiona sat very still for 20 minutes and took stock. The zip ties were cheap. Her wrists were not small, which meant they'd had to cinch them wider than ideal, which meant there was marginally more play than they'd intended. The chair she was sitting on was plastic, patio furniture, stacking kind. She outweighed it significantly. The man with the phone had positioned himself near the door. The pacer was coming closer on each pass and not watching her particularly carefully. Thought about the pothos on her desk. She thought about $38,000 in student debt that she had not worked this hard to escape, only to end up in a Ville-Émard storage unit because someone named Tarrant had bad judgment. She waited until the pacer's back was turned, threw her full weight backward, and let physics handle it. The plastic chair shattered, hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath out of her, but the ties snapped on the way down. The left wrist entirely, the right wrist just enough. She wrenched the rest free on the concrete floor, gasping. The man with the phone spun around. "What the?" She was already moving. Not gracefully, not with any particular plan, just moving because momentum was the only thing she had. Shoved a metal shelving unit as she passed it, and it went down with a crash between her and the pacer, buying her 4 seconds. The door had a thumb lock, not a deadbolt. She hit it at what she estimated was approximately her top speed, which was not impressive but was sufficient. She was 2 blocks away before she heard shouting behind her. It was 10:40 at night. She was in an industrial stretch with no dépanneur in sight and no phone. Kept moving until she reached a gas station on the corner of Monk, where a teenage attendant stared at her. Dusty, wrists abraded, chips somehow still in her coat pocket, and let her use the store phone without being asked. Called the main line for Varga Acquisitions, because it was the number she had memorized. Henrik answered on the second ring. He said nothing for a long moment when she told him her location. "Don't move," he said. He ate the chips while she waited, felt it was warranted. They came in under 20 minutes. 2 cars, Henrik driving the first one. Callum was in the passenger seat. He was out of the car before it fully stopped, crossing the lit forecourt of the gas station with his jacket gone and his sleeves pushed up, and an expression she had never seen on his face before. He stopped in front of her. His eyes moved over her wrists, her face, the state of her coat, with a rapidly controlled intensity. It hurt. His voice was careful. Constructed careful, the way you'd build something load-bearing. "My wrists are a bit roughed up," Fiona said, "and I lost my transit pass, other than that." He reached out very slowly, like she might startle, and took her right wrist in his hand. Turned it to the light. The abraded skin was already bruising. Something moved through his face that had nothing careful about it. "Trent," he said quietly, to Henrik behind him, and the single word had the weight of a verdict. "I know," Henrik said. "There were 2 of them in the unit with me," Fiona said. "The shelving unit between here and there has probably got one of them under it by now. The other one is faster." Callum looked at her. "You broke out." "I broke the chair," she said. "Technically, the chair did most of the work. I just redirected the momentum." She paused. "I have a physics degree's worth of weight behind me when I commit to something. It's occasionally useful." He was still holding her wrist. I'm going to take care of Tarrant, he said. Tonight, and I'm going to have Henrik take you somewhere safe until I do. His thumb moved, very carefully, along the edge of the bruising on her wrist. I should have. I knew there was a risk this week. I should have. You couldn't have known he'd follow me home, Fiona said. I should have made sure you weren't alone. His voice was very low. That is not something I intend to repeat. She looked up at him. Station light was unflattering and fluorescent, and she was dusty, and her hair had been a disaster since approximately the storage unit, and she was still holding a mostly empty bag of chips. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her in the hotel ballroom on the first night, like she was something specific, in a room full of generics. Callum, she said. It was the first time she'd used his given name. He went very still. I want to be clear that I'm not going anywhere. The pothos is just starting to vine properly, and I haven't finished the Beaupre account reconciliation, which you and I both know exists now because I created it, and I'm also frankly very underpaid for the actual scope of what I do, which we should discuss. Something broke open in his face. Not fell apart, broke open, the way a room does when you finally open all the windows. He pulled her in and kissed her. Careful at first, then not careful at all, one hand at her jaw and one at the back of her coat, and she went up on her toes and kissed him back with everything she'd been sensibly cataloguing for 7 weeks. When he pulled back, his forehead dropped to hers, and she could feel the controlled, careful quality of his breathing working very hard. The salary, he said, his voice rough, is negotiable. The benefits package too, she said against his mouth. He laughed. It was a short sound, surprised out of him, and she felt it more than heard it. Henrik, from a respectful distance, said something in Hungarian that made the other men suddenly find the middle distance very interesting. Callum took her to a suite at the Omni that night, with Henrik's team downstairs and the doors deadbolt thrown. He ordered room service that arrived in under 20 minutes and sat across from her while she ate a full meal for the first time since Monday, because the week had been too tense for proper appetite. He watched her with an attentiveness that wasn't intrusive, just present the way he was present in every room he occupied, fully and without apology. He told her something then, that she'd already understood in outline, and what Varga Acquisitions actually was, what he actually was, meant, and the men who came and went before noon, and why 4 men in expensive suits had stood in his office, with the posture of people who had miscalculated their position. She listened. She asked 3 clarifying questions that made him look at her differently each time. Not with surprise, exactly, but with something adjacent. So, she said when he'd finished. So, he agreed. I'm staying, she said. Fiona, I'm staying. She set down her fork. Nut. I've considered the risk profile. I understand the business model. I have $38,000 in student debt and a pothos that needs me, and I found $19,000 in skimmed courier accounts inside my 2nd week, which means your books need someone who actually looks at them. She met his eyes. I'm staying. Question is, whether you're going to let me renegotiate my contract in the morning, or whether we're going to have a whole thing about it. Callum Varga, who had not, by any available evidence, been challenged on a decision in this city in approximately a decade, looked at her for a long moment. The morning, he said. Good. Tarrant was handled by the following Friday, in ways she didn't ask about, and he didn't specify. What she was told was that the problem was resolved, and that certain parties had been made to understand that Fiona Mercer was not a variable anyone in this city was going to touch going forward. The storage unit in Ville-Émard stood empty after that. Her contract was renegotiated, now handled the full scope of Varga Acquisitions' financial records, the operational accounts, and the others, the ones in the ledger, with a methodical precision that made the men in the outer office treat her with the wary respect usually reserved for people who could make their problems disappear on a spreadsheet. Because she could. She was very good at it. Henrik brought her coffee from Bishop some mornings when Callum was already in early meetings, did it with the solemnity of a person executing an important delegation. The pothos grew 3 new vines by November. Callum didn't change who he was, and she didn't ask him to. She'd understood who he was from the second week, maybe earlier, and she had stayed. That choice had been made with full information, which was the only way she knew how to make choices. He, in turn, understood that she was not decorative or peripheral, or a person to be managed. She was the one who found the $19,000, who walked into the middle of the meeting and walked out without flinching, who broke the chair in the storage unit and called the main office number from a gas station on Monk because it was the one she'd memorized. He looked at her like that. Like the woman who'd memorized the number every single time. Montreal winters are unforgiving, and the St. Lawrence goes grey, and the city folds into itself in the particular way it has, close and warm under all that cold. Fiona Mercer had grown up broke in this city, and known it in the way that you know a place that's asked a lot of you. She knew the dépanneurs and the metro lines and the specific sound the buses made on wet pavement at midnight. Had never expected to know it like this. From the 14th floor, from the inside of an armored car, from a hotel suite with a deadbolt throne, and a man who arranged protection details and renegotiated contracts, and brought her flat whites and didn't look at her like she was something to see past. She balanced his books. She kept his accounts clean, told him, once, when he was about to make a decision with a flaw in the logic, that he was wrong, and argued her position until he acknowledged she was right, which he did with the air of someone who was not used to it, and was deciding, incrementally, that he didn't mind. He was 26 years old and 270 pounds, and she owed $38,000 to Concordia, and her landlord had taped a formal notice to her door, and she had spilled coffee on the most dangerous man in the city, and the rest had followed. She was, without question, exactly where she was supposed to be.